तत्सवितुर्वरं रूपं ज्योतिः परस्य धीमहि यन्नः सत्येन दीपयेत्। ॐ तत्सवितुर्वरं रूपं ज्योतिः परस्य धीमहि यन्नः सत्येन दीपयेत्। ॐ तत्सवितुर्वरं रूपं ज्योतिः परस्य धीमहि यन्नः सत्येन दीपयेत्।
My dear brothers and sisters, boys and girls, nice to meet all of you again today. Today's session is an introduction to yoga. Before we go to the session itself, let me say that I'm a rather, fond of introductions. In a way, the entire course is an introduction to yoga because 7 weeks is not long enough to deal with a vast subject like integral yoga. But today you can say would be an introduction to an introduction. And I am particularly fond of introductions, and for that I'll tell you why. Till I was in class 8, I found history and geography rather difficult and unpleasant subjects to study because that required a lot of memorizing of facts, and that is something I didn't like. So I thought when I go to class 9, I'll choose science, and science will be very exciting to study. It will be all based on understanding. I'll not have to remember anything. And therefore, I was looking forward to class 9 when I would be able to get rid of history and geography. But then the first class that I had was by a teacher who, as soon as he entered the class, turned to the blackboard and started writing on it something like, oxygen O, hydrogen H, potassium K, sodium Na, and so on. And he filled the board with a large number of symbols and formulae. And he said, when you come for the next class, you should remember all this. I thought, is this science? It seems to be worse than history and geography. And what was missing was that nobody introduced science properly. And of course, I made up for it by going to the library and getting some good books on science. And what I did was to study, mainly read from those books, two things: the preface to the book and the introductory chapter, the first chapter. And then I knew that, yes, what I thought science was about is really true. These people don't know how to teach science. So I'll study it my way. So therefore, after I became a teacher, I made it a point that I would not go to a subject without introducing it properly. And that not only clues the students in, it also creates in them an urge to know more. And that is what the purpose of an introduction is. And with these little remarks, I think we can now share the screen. It's my privilege to pass on to all of you the love and blessings of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo from Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch. This course, Yes.01, is a part of the celebrations of the 150th birth anniversary of Sri Aurobindo and the 75th Independence Day of India, which coincide on the 15th of August this year. So our topic is getting introduced to yoga. You would naturally expect that this type of a talk would start with a definition of yoga, what yoga is. But as a teacher, I have always believed that learning by definitions is bad, even if the definition is good. Because, a definition is rather crisp. It condenses a lot of knowledge and it appears very impressive. But then having learned the definition, the student gets a false feeling that now have understood the subject. Because the definition, in fact, reflects somebody else's understanding, which he has tried to crystallize in the form of a definition. The converse is not true. Just because a person knows the definition doesn't mean that he has understood the subject. So instead, what my approach would be to talk about what yoga is and then leave it to you to deduce your own definition. So you can, in fact, think about how to define yoga once you understood what the subject is about. If I were to ask somebody what yoga is, then one of the typical answers would be that it consists of asanas or the various postures, pranayamas, which are breathing practices, and to that a person may feel that to make the answer more comprehensive, let me add also meditation. Now, what do these techniques do? The asanas primarily improve our physical health. Pranayamas are a sort of a bridge between the body and the mind, and therefore would help both the body and the mind. And meditation would primarily help us improve the function of the mind. So that is what these would do. And you would say, well, that should be quite enough, because it is the improvement of the function of the body and the mind to make the body and the mind healthier that we practice yoga. And therefore, that should be quite enough. But to understand whether it is really enough, what we have to think about is what the body and the mind are. The body and the mind are mere instruments that we use for everything that we do in life. And the improvement in the function of an instrument is not enough. Why it is not enough is because the instrument can be used for good and bad. For example, a knife is also an instrument. We can use a knife to chop fruits and vegetables, but we can also use the same knife to stab somebody. In the same way, if a person has improved the function of the body and the mind through techniques such as asanas, pranayamas, and meditation, this person will be able to do a better job as a teacher, as a doctor, as a scientist, as a manager. But then come to think of it, suppose a terrorist is physically unfit, emotionally unstable, and intellectually dull. Will this person be able to launch a successful terrorist attack? No, he won't be. And therefore, if this person uses the yogic techniques to improve the function of the body and the mind, he also improves his chances of becoming a more successful terrorist. Now, if a discipline helps a terrorist as much as it helps a teacher, it certainly cannot qualify as a spiritual discipline. And we all know that yoga is a spiritual discipline. So what is it that makes yoga a spiritual discipline? Not these techniques, but the guidance that yoga provides on how to use these instruments. So in a way, one can say that yoga is not just the techniques which improve the function of the instruments, that is the body and the mind. It also provides guidance on how to use these instruments. And that is what makes yoga a spiritual discipline. Because if a person follows this guidance, which is available in yoga, the person will not become a terrorist. So we can add to the techniques guidance on how to use our instruments, the body and the mind. And that is to some extent what completes what yoga is. One can almost put it mathematically that yoga is a combination of techniques plus the guidance that it provides on how to use the body and the mind. So in other words, yoga has a visible part and an invisible part. The visible part are the techniques, and the invisible part is what tells us how to use the body and the mind. While the visible part may take an hour or two in a day, all the remaining 22 hours or 23 hours are available to us for using the guidance that yoga provides. You might say, well, it may be so, but then we are not interested in the invisible part. Why should we be interested in that? Because we are quite contented if our body and mind function better. Now, why we should be interested in the invisible part is firstly because yoga is a spiritual discipline, and we have seen that if we do not use the guidance that it provides, it cannot qualify as a spiritual discipline. You might say, well, that doesn't matter. That is just semantics. We don't care whether it qualifies or not. We are quite contented if our body and mind function better. But then we also look upon yoga as something which will give us peace of mind, not just improve our ability to concentrate and things like that, but also will give us peace of mind. And in our erratic and unpredictable world, it is difficult to be at peace. And therefore, we look upon yoga these days quite commonly as a stress buster. It will put our mind at peace. And how do we think it will do it? Because it includes meditation. But that is something expecting too much from too little. 20 minutes of meditation in a day can't compensate for the tension and turmoil of 24 hours. What gives us peace of mind is if we use yoga for guiding our life. Because then what happens is that we start looking at all the events and circumstances of life, the so-called traumatic events, unpleasant events, with a different vision. It changes our attitude with which we look at the so-called fortune and misfortune. It gives us a positive way of looking at these things, no matter what. And that is what gives us peace of mind. So unless we change our attitude to life, in terms of the philosophy underlying yoga, which is a spiritual philosophy, we cannot be at peace. That is something we certainly want. In addition, the invisible part makes our life meaningful in the sense that it adds purpose to life. It makes life worth living because we may be healthy, our body and mind may be healthy, we may have peace of mind, but then all that cannot be divorced from the fact that our life also becomes more and more useful to those around us. That's what actually truly makes life meaningful, and that also happens as a result of following the invisible part of yoga. And last but not least, even if we are just interested in better physical health, even that does not happen only with the visible part. Because if we practice all those techniques without caring for why we are practicing them, then yogic techniques become just like any other physical exercise. It's just because we bend our body in a different way, that doesn't make it a spiritual discipline, and that will not give us the additional health benefits. What gives us additional health benefits is that these techniques themselves now fit into a philosophy, and the result is that we don't perform those techniques because we have to, because we are afraid of disease and death, because we want to live a little longer, because we want to be a little more healthy. We don't practice them for that. Of course, all that happens. We want all that, but then that becomes a fringe benefit. Why we are practicing all these techniques is because we want to use the body and the mind for something more meaningful. We want to use the body and the mind to do what we are truly in this world for. So now, when we fit these techniques into that philosophy, then when we are doing those techniques, we do them because we want to do them. We don't do them because we have to do them for the sake of living a little longer. So that makes all the difference, because if we do them because we want to do them, we are doing them happily, voluntarily, cheerfully. And if we do that, the health benefits improve because the mind-body relationship is now on a scientific footing. So if we are doing them and at the same time we are feeling uneasy because we have to miss so much. I have to get up early in the morning to do these practices. I might as well have been in bed for a little longer. Now, if we do it with that, then the benefit that we get from these techniques would be neutralized, if not completely, at least partly, by the fact that I'm not doing them happily. I'm doing them out of fear of disease and death. On the other hand, if I get up, do them voluntarily and cheerfully because I want to do them, then the health benefits go up because of the mind-body relationship. So that is why the invisible part becomes important. And that's why Sri Aurobindo has said, all life is yoga. So now here you have a very short and crisp definition of yoga in a way. And you can understand what it means, because it's not just the techniques on which we spend an hour or two in a day, which is yoga. The remaining part of the day during which we are silently and practicing yoga, others can't see what we are doing, and yet it is yoga. That is what makes yoga a 24-hour discipline, and that's how all life becomes yoga. Now, this is a very crisp definition, but at the same time, if one just looks at this without understanding the context, it can be easily misunderstood. It doesn't mean all life, no matter how lived, is yoga. All what it means is that all life provides us an opportunity for the practice of yoga. Now let's see how life provides us those opportunities a little more in detail. One thing that we all do is some sort of work. And how can this work be done in such a way that it becomes a part of yoga? Because work is only an opportunity for the practice of yoga. And or if we say that yoga is a type of worship, then work is worship, is a common saying. But at the same time, all work is not worship. Work becomes worship only if it is done in a particular way, in a particular spirit. It doesn't have to be a different type of work. We can continue doing what we are doing, whether it is as a teacher or as a homemaker or as a parent, taking care of children, or as a doctor or a nurse, taking care of patients. Whatever work we are doing, we can continue to do that, but it can be done differently in a different spirit. And that is what makes that work a part of yoga. Now, one important part of whatever we do is making choices. And how do we make choices in life ordinarily? Using one out of three basic tools. And to understand that, let me take an example. Suppose there's a building on fire, and firemen have reached there, and they are told that there are a few people trapped inside the building. So a fireman, who hears this, at once gets an impulse, let me enter this burning building and rescue these people. But before he does that, he starts thinking, but it will be very hot and suffocating inside. And then it occurs to him that it will be also very risky. Suppose I die, what will happen to my family? Now, here you can see that first he got an impulse that he should enter the building. Then he started thinking about the type of experience it will be, hot and suffocating, unpleasant experience. Now, where does this voice come from, which tries to go in for something that feels pleasant and avoids what is unpleasant? The emotional part of the being. And then he thought that it will be risky, What will happen to my family if I die? Where did this voice come from? It came from his intellect, because the intellect works on the basis of reason. And what did the intellect do here? It supported the choice made by the emotional part of the being. It provided a reason for not going inside. But then where did that initial impulse come from? Let me enter the burning building and rescue these people. That came from his divine essence, or the soul. The soul is not there just to give us the consolation that some bit of us will continue to live even after we are dead and gone. The soul also has a function while we are living. It has a dynamic aspect, which Sri Aurobindo and the mother have called the psychic being. And it intervenes at such moments when we have a choice to make. And in a faint but very clear voice, it tells us what the right thing to do is. Now, let's see what would be the consequences of this person listening to this inner voice emanating from his soul, or whether he neglects it. And suppose he decides to listen to this voice and enters the burning building. Irrespective of the outcome, whether or not he's able to save somebody, what happens when he comes out? In spite of the experience being unpleasant, in spite of its being hot and suffocating, in spite of the fact that he might not have been able to rescue anybody, irrespective of everything, he feels good. He feels good because he did his best, and even more than that, he gets peace of mind. Because he knows that I did my best, the outcome is not in my own hands. On the other hand, compare it with what would happen if he does not enter the burning building. If he listens to those voices, it will be an unpleasant experience, it will be risky, and so on. Suppose he doesn't enter the burning building, then what happens is that he feels bad, especially later on if he learns that some people did die who were trapped inside the building. Then he feels very guilty, and he feels very uneasy, and this uneasiness can become recurrent. It will keep coming up off and on, and it might follow him to his deathbed. That day I was in front of a building, I knew that some people might be trapped inside, and I also knew what was the best thing to do. I knew that the best thing to do would be to enter the building. I didn't do it. So just contrast the consequences of these two. On one hand, feeling good and getting lasting mental peace. And on the other hand, feeling guilty and getting recurrent uneasiness. Now you would have understood what is the type of choice that yoga would like us to make. What is the type of guidance that yoga provides? The guidance that yoga provides is listen to the voice of the soul, listen to the voice of the dynamic aspect of the soul, which is the psychic being. So listen to the voice of the psychic being. That is the most authentic choice. One may have 100 reasons for neglecting that voice, because the intellect works on the basis of an analysis of risk and benefit, profit and loss, and tries to choose what is most profitable and least risky. But that is not what the best choice is. The best choice does not depend on that type of an analysis. It is a choice which doesn't depend upon any type of calculation. It's a choice made out of love. And that comes from the soul. So yoga tells us to make the choice at that level, a choice which expresses our love for others. So that is the type of choice it guides us towards. And that is the choice which is not only good for us and the others, it also gives us what we are always looking for, that is joy and lasting mental peace. What else does yoga guide us about? Attitude to ups and downs of life, the so-called fortune and misfortune. How do we look at these? Now, the normal way would be to look upon them as pleasant and unpleasant experiences. But yoga doesn't look at them that way. Yoga looks upon them as opportunities for fulfilling the very purpose of life. Why that is important is because if all were going well with life, then we would find life so entertaining, amusing, and absorbing that one would forget the true purpose of life. On the other hand, if everything kept going wrong with life, we would get so dejected, disappointed, and depressed that one would feel like committing suicide. What keeps us going is a mixture of both. So we get a mixture of both because we need both. That is how yoga looks upon the ups and downs of life. One might ask that if one is living a good life, doing one's work with a yogic attitude as an instrument of the divine, leaving the outcome of the work to the divine, making choices which come from the level of the soul, then will we have only anything unpleasant in life happening to us? Wouldn't, as a result of living a good life, a yogic life, wouldn't we be rewarded with only fortune and have no misfortune in life? Well, in all its wisdom, the divine has not seen it that way. That is our human way of looking at these things. Just because a person is doing his work sincerely in the spirit of yoga, just because he is making the most authentic choices, the best choices, the person does not become immune to a road accident, to an incurable disease, or a failed marriage, or a heavy financial loss. He doesn't become immune to any of these. And therefore, what is important is not that we assume that we will not get these things, unpleasant things will not happen to us, but understand how we can look at them differently. And we find that both fortune, so-called fortune, and misfortune can become opportunities for fulfilling the purpose of life, which is spiritual growth. We'll come to this a little more in detail when we go to the purpose of life, but just to touch upon it briefly here, any good fortune means that we have got more than our share of something that everybody wants, be it money, be it knowledge, be it the capacity to work hard, or be a talent like, say, singing. So something we have got, which we have got more than our share of something in life. So that's the fortune. Now, if you've got more than our share of something, the best way to use it is to share it with others. Because if we look around, we'll find that there is always somebody who needs what we have too much of. And sharing multiplies that joy. As Sri Aurobindo says in Savitri, incomplete is the joy not shared. So in fact, it enhances joy, it multiplies the joy. Not only it multiplies the joy, it expresses our love for those around us. And we have seen that all expressions of love take us closer, not only to others, but then if we look upon these others as manifestations of the divine, it takes us closer to the divine. And that is what yoga is about. In the same way, misfortune can also be an opportunity, because it is only when we find ourselves helpless that we become conscious of how flimsy and useless all those things are, of which we are so proud sometimes, be it our intelligence, be it our wealth, or be it our contacts. There are situations in which all these things prove completely useless, and we find ourselves totally helpless. And when that happens, then whom do we turn to? We turn to the one who has no limitations, who has no weaknesses, who can do everything, for whom everything is easy, who can pull us out of all this in a miraculous way. So we turn to the divine, but then the divine also needs instruments to rescue us, and those instruments materialize. We feel grateful to them, and takes us closer to people around us. Now, getting closer to people around us and getting closer to the divine essentially comes to the same thing. And then it also gives us a good ego bashing. We become more humble, we become more helpful, and we know that somebody helped us when we were in trouble. So if somebody else is in trouble, we should also help that person. So we become a better person. And because now we have become more humble, if we have hurt somebody, we have no difficulty in apologizing. And if somebody has hurt us, we find it very easy to forgive that person. In other words, misfortune can make us a much better person. While I'm in good fortune and misfortune can both be opportunities for becoming a better person, or growing spiritually, the sad fact is that most of us grow spiritually more through misfortune than through good fortune. So if work provides us an opportunity for the practice of yoga by telling us with what attitude we should work, that is, work as an instrument of the divine, uh, leave the outcome to the divine, and we make choices in life at the level of the soul, and we learn to look at the ups and downs of life properly. Then what else is left? That is all what life is made up of. In other words, all life provides us an opportunity for the practice of yoga, and that is why Sri Aurobindo is saying all life is yoga. One can also say yoga is a change. Yoga is a change for the better, becoming better tomorrow than we are today. And becoming better or self-improvement is a very long journey, because as they say, there's always room for improvement. And after we have improved a bit, we find that there's scope for more improvement, and therefore this can be an endless journey. It's an endless journey, a long journey, but it's an enjoyable journey. Now, what does this change involve? This change involves an improvement in the functioning of the instruments, the body and the mind, and the alignment of these instruments to the deepest self, that is the soul, so that these instruments not only perform better, they also start functioning more and more in light of the soul. Because the guidance is available within us, the spark of the divine is within us, but since it is rather invisible and not clearly perceived, and it's something which is quite content to be neglected, it provides us the right guidance, but it does not insist. And therefore, to become more aware of it and to pay heed to it, to let it prevail, is also a part of yoga. And of course, if we let that voice prevail frequently enough, then what happens is the emotional part of the being and the intellect also start undergoing a change. They start getting transformed. They start working habitually and naturally more and more in light of the voice of the soul. And the result is that gradually the discrepancy or the conflicts between the emotional part of the being, the intellect, and the soul, they start diminishing. And that is in fact what yoga is about. That is unification of the being, the body and the mind functioning in light of the soul. And that's what unification is about. Sri Aurobindo has also said that yoga is a methodized effort for moving towards self-perfection. Now, it's a methodized effort, which means it involves effort, and there's a method to it. It's not a haphazard method. It's not a haphazard process, and it involves a movement towards self-perfection, which means the emphasis is on the direction rather than the goal. The goal is self-perfection, but then any movement in that direction is also yoga. So yoga is a path which takes us towards self-perfection, and yoga is the goal, which is union. Union with what? Union with the divine. Because if the body and the mind have united with the soul, then so that the body and the mind are functioning always habitually and naturally in light of the soul, then in a way we have become one with the divine. If we become one with the divine within us, we are also one with the divine around us in everybody else. And that is what this union means. And yoga means union, and that is the goal of yoga. So yoga is a movement towards self-perfection. The path is essentially about the direction in which we move. Now, self-perfection can have many aspects, the body and the mind. And accordingly, we have different schools of yoga which emphasize different aspects of this perfection. The school of perfection that lays emphasis primarily on the perfection of the body is Hatha Yoga. And the various techniques of asanas and pranayamas that we know come from Hatha Yoga. The school of yoga that emphasizes mental perfection is Raja Yoga. And that gives us clues to the technique of meditation. And then we have the yoga of the Gita, which we'll talk about in some detail in one of the subsequent sessions. But there are at least two important things in the yoga of the Gita which make it unique. One is that it allows for a lot of flexibility to the student. It's a very student-friendly yoga. One can start with whatever suits the person best in terms of his temperament, capacity, and circumstances. One can start with action or knowledge or devotion. So it's a very user-friendly, student-friendly yoga, which provides that flexibility. It doesn't prescribe a rigid path which everybody has to follow in exactly the same way. And the second important thing that yoga does is to bring yoga into daily life. It doesn't talk about the yoga which can be practiced only in seclusion, on a hilltop or in a cave or in a forest. It talks about yoga which anybody can practice in everyday life. And what makes it further student-friendly is that not only one doesn't have to renounce life, one can choose the path which suits the person best, at least start on that path. What makes it still more user-friendly is that it doesn't emphasize too much the ultimate goal. The Lord, Sri Krishna himself gives the assurance, every step that you take towards me will bring you something. Now we come to integral yoga, or the yoga of Sri Aurobindo and the mother. Now integral means total. And so one can see that it is a synthesis. It is a synthesis of all the major traditional schools of yoga, some of which are, I've just talked about, Hatha Yoga, Raja Yoga, Yoga of the Gita. And of these three, integral yoga leans the most on the yoga of the Gita. But all the same, it does not neglect the body and it does not neglect the mind, and therefore does take the essentials, the essential principles of Hatha Yoga and Raja Yoga as well. We shall talk in greater detail about integral yoga later. But then one thing I must say that integral yoga not only takes into account the essential features of all the traditional schools of yoga, it does it in such a way that the spirit underlying yoga is not subordinated. That was one of the major reasons why Sri Aurobindo worked out that synthesis about 100 years ago. And we can easily understand that because to some extent, the reasons for which he undertook the synthesis have not disappeared even today. Yoga had come to a point where the outer form, that is things like techniques of asanas and pranayamas and meditation, had come to subordinate the spirit underlying yoga. And therefore, one of the reasons why he took up this synthesis was that that spirit needed to be revived, so that we don't get lost so much in the details of the external form, exactly the way an asana should be done, exactly which asana should be done, and so on, so that we don't get lost in that, but instead understand what, in fact, yoga is about and what these techniques are about and how they fit into the overall philosophy of yoga. So that was one of the things that prompted this synthesis. And then, of course, he went even beyond all the traditional yogas, because while the traditional yogas have been primarily for individual salvation, he gave us, in a very emphatic and clear way, the collective aspect of yoga, how the yoga that we practice can be a contribution to the collective upliftment of the human race. And while the unit of the collective remains an individual, if the individual is conscious that the yoga is not only for myself, but it is for the upliftment of the human race as a whole, it acquires a different dimension altogether. So that is what integral yoga is about. Now we'll come to a few questions. And if it were a live class, I would ask you for your answers and so on, but we'll try to get as close to it as possible. So you have a look at the question and try to answer it in your own mind. About yoga, all of the following are true except, which means that you have to pick up the wrong answer. 3 of these statements would be right, only one is wrong. So you have to pick out the wrong statement. Now, what are the 4 statements? It means union. It seeks to unite body and mind. It is a physical and mental discipline. It is both a path and a goal. Now, yoga means union. That is true. Union with the divine. Just saying it means union is a little vague, but all the same not wrong. B, it seeks to unite body and mind. Now that leaves the question, unite body and mind with what? You might say, well, it seeks to unite the body and the mind with each other. But then that is something which in any case is there. The body and the mind are united. The body does what the mind tells it to do. So the body and the mind are already united. So saying that it unites body and mind really doesn't mean anything. That is not what yoga is for. If the body and the mind were not together, probably we wouldn't be alive. Or at least not, say, we'll be like an unconscious person, a vegetating person. So seeks to unite body and mind, that is not what yoga is for. The important thing is to unite body and mind with the soul. So this is a wrong statement. Let's see the other two to make sure. It's a physical and mental discipline. Yes, it is. It does involve both. It is both a path and a goal. Yes, that's also true. It's by walking the path of yoga that we reach the goal of yoga, that is union with the divine. So the correct answer seems to be B. So about yoga, all of the following are true except it seeks to unite body and mind. Another question. Yoga is a spiritual discipline that requires renunciation of worldly life, is a spiritual discipline for self-improvement, is a set of asanas and pranayamas. Yoga and meditation together form integral yoga. Now, in multiple choice questions, we have to pick out not only the right answer, but the best answer. That is, sometimes more than one options may be correct, but we have to choose the better one out of the two. If 2 are correct, then the better one out of 2, the best out of the 4. Now, yoga is a spiritual discipline that requires renunciation of worldly life. This certainly is not true, because one can practice yoga while living a worldly life. In fact, that is the type of yoga that would suit most of us. Yoga is a spiritual discipline for self-improvement. That is true. Yoga is a set of asanas and pranayamas. Yes, it is, but it is not just that. And therefore, this statement is not the best option. Yoga and meditation together form integral yoga. Now, when we say yoga and meditation, we are talking about something which expression which is very commonly used. But in fact, it's not correct, because meditation is a part of yoga. Meditation is one of the yogic techniques. So we don't have to add meditation to yoga to make anything more complete. Yoga in itself is complete, of which the techniques such as meditation are a small part. Asanas and pranayamas are yet another small part, because what is still left, the invisible part of yoga, is what completes yoga. And therefore, to even use the expression like yoga and meditation, although it's extremely common, reflects an ignorance about what yoga actually is. So what is the correct answer? B, yoga is a spiritual discipline for self-improvement. The relationship between yoga and meditation is, once again, I've deliberately used this expression yoga and meditation because so common. Sometimes I seem to be in a minority of one while trying to appear allergic to this expression yoga and meditation. The relationship between yoga and meditation is, A, yoga is a physical practice, whereas meditation is a mental practice. Yoga is a part of meditation. Meditation is a part of yoga. Now here I'm breaking one of the basic rules of making multiple choice questions. You should not have 2 contradictory options. But then sometimes, breaking a rule makes the question more effective. So that also one should know. Here it does become more effective. That's why I have broken that rule. The relationship between yoga and meditation is D. If meditation is added to yoga, yoga becomes complete. Now let's see which of these is the best option. The relationship between yoga and meditation is A. Yoga is a physical practice, whereas meditation is a mental practice. Well, meditation may be called a mental practice, but yoga is certainly not just a physical practice. So this can't be the best option. Let's see the other options. B, yoga is a part of meditation. No, yoga is not a part of uh, meditation. This gives rather too much importance to meditation. Looks as if meditation is something great. A small part of it perhaps may be yoga. And sometimes when we talk of yoga, some people do have this approach. They feel the main thing is meditation. You tell them that this is a yoga course, will you teach us how to meditate? So meditation is given sometimes undue importance, excessive importance. It's a rather overrated technique. But I'm not saying it's unimportant or it can't help, but it's overrated, so much so that people sometimes start feeling that yoga is a part of meditation. See, meditation is a part of yoga. This is even more common error, sorry, this is not an error. This is actually true. Meditation is a part of yoga. Now, this is not how people generally look at it. They look upon yoga and meditation as two separate things. The most common way of looking at it is what is indicated in A, that yoga is a physical practice, meditation is a mental practice. So yoga for the body, that is asanas and pranayamas for the body, and meditation for the mind. So meditation is a part of yoga, yes. Yoga has a lot more than meditation and asanas and pranayamas, as we saw the invisible part, but all the same, meditation is a part of yoga. So C seems to be quite all right. And then D, if meditation is added to yoga, yoga becomes complete, which means if you add, what is implied is that if you add meditation to asanas and pranayamas, then yoga becomes complete. That still doesn't complete yoga. So the best option seems to be C, meditation is a part of yoga. Yoga is a set of asanas and breathing practices. Yoga includes meditation. Yoga is an easy way to good health. Yoga includes asanas, breathing practices, meditation, and a change in our attitude to life. Now let's see these, examine these one by one. Yoga is a set of asanas and breathing practices. Very common understanding, but not correct. Yoga includes meditation. Yes, it does include meditation, correct. In the previous question, that's what we selected as the best option. But let's see if there's something better in this question than this. Yoga includes meditation, that is correct, but we are looking for a better option if available in this question. Yoga is an easy way to good health. Again, a common misunderstanding. Yoga is neither easy, nor was it designed for good health. Good health is a fringe benefit. It's a byproduct of yoga. And while yoga is enjoyable, it is not easy. There's a difference between being easy and enjoyable. Huh? Then yoga includes asanas, breathing practices, meditation, and a change in our attitude to life. This seems to be the best option because option B was correct. Yoga includes meditation, but then that is implied also in D. But then it's more comprehensive. It tells us in greater detail what actually yoga is, and therefore D is the best option here. You'll find material, more or less everything that we talked today in this book, A Primer on Yoga, Theory and Practice. This was published by the National Book Trust India in 2015, around the first International Day of Yoga. That's the occasion on which they brought out this book. And this forms the first chapter of this book. The title is Yoga, a Wide Angle View. This is a picture postcard view of the place where I stay and work, Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch, and you're all welcome here. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to drop an email to sa150yes@gmail.com. Thank you.
Yes, we can take questions now. Yes, you can go ahead.
Can I speak?
Yes, please.
Thanks. The raising of hand was a kind of error, but I can put my question because I really have one. Because the availability of the book Primer of Yoga, because it was mentioned in email also, and I don't have it here. So how can I get it? Where to get it? How to come?
Of course, one place to get it from would be the National Book Trust itself. But if you write to them whether they'll send it, I can't be sure. There should be an ebook also available. But again, National Book Trust, all the books of National Book Trust are not available as ebooks. So certainly one thing you can do is to send us an email on this sf150yes@gmail.com. And what we'll do is we'll try and get this book mailed to you that we can organize. So you can send us an email with the postal address.
Thank you very much.
But first you can try, the website of the National Book Trust and see if an ebook at least is available.
Namaskar. Why do we say yoga, not yoga?
Yes. Now, the British are often blamed for changing yoga into yoga. But let me clarify a little. We are not being totally fair when we do that. This is a word which occurs in both in Hindi and Sanskrit. And the way it is written is exactly the same in Hindi and Sanskrit. But the way it is pronounced in these two languages is a little different. In Hindi, we call it yoga, but spelled in exactly the same way. In Sanskrit, the pronunciation becomes yoga. Because you see, if you look at the way we write it, ga is full, ga is not half. So if it's a full ga, it will be pronounced as yoga in Sanskrit, not as yog, because it becomes yog only if you have half a ga. That means you have a halant under the ga. That is not there, neither in Sanskrit nor in Hindi. So in Hindi, we make that little error in pronunciation, and even if there's no halant, we call it yog. But in Sanskrit, if there's no halant, ga pura hai, to pura hi bolenge. So we'll call it yoga. Now, if yoga is transliterated into English, then it will become Y-O-G-A. Now, whether this A will be pronounced as a or as a, for that there are again rules. You might have seen those little dots and dashes which they put along with the A. So here you will put a dot, not a dash on top of it. If you put a dash, it becomes yoga. But if you put a dot, it becomes yoga. So if you transliterate correctly in English, then you will call it yoga still. But then what happens is in transliteration, and the way we ordinarily write, we neither put a dot nor a dash, we just write Y-O-G-A. And then we have, by common sort of usage, come to pronounce it as yoga. So that should explain it. But the important thing is not exactly how we pronounce it. The important thing is how we practice it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes, Sonika, you can ask your question.
Thank you. Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
Sir, my question is about the physical aspect of yoga, which is, we understand that it is a very small part, but nonetheless, it is given importance to, particularly while reading some text on Raj Yoga, I was reading that the flexibility of spine is something that is laid stress on. Now, I understand that with a lot of practice, you certainly beat yourself. But then the natural tendency of the body is something that you inherit. So somebody who has been practicing for long may not be as flexible as somebody else who is just a beginner. Now, it is so though not complete, though it is not the only part of not the, how do I say? So though it is not complete yoga, but it is certainly an important aspect of yoga, right? It is laid stress on. So how do you, kind of the capability of how one performs these postures or asanas, how do you relate it to one's stage of evolution and progress on the path of yoga?
To some extent, we'll come to it in greater detail tomorrow, no, day after tomorrow, when we talk about Hatha Yoga. But all the same, your question is essentially about physical practices, and there are two aspects to it, 2 or 3 aspects I could see. One was that not everybody's body is equally flexible, and therefore we may not be able to achieve the same level of perfection in the performance of these physical practices. That is true. And as in everything in yoga, the idea is not to achieve a certain arbitrary standard of perfection. The idea is to be able to do better than what we are already doing. So it's a path of self-improvement. And anybody, irrespective of how the person's body is constituted, if the person continues doing these practices, will be able to do them better tomorrow than the person is able to do today. Tomorrow and today don't have to be taken literally. What it means is that the person will improve. Not everybody's body may become so flexible that the person can do the most difficult practices and almost looks like, as if he's made of rubber. So everybody may not be able to do that. But certainly everybody will get a body which is more flexible than it is now. So the flexibility will improve. And not everybody has to have that type of a body which looks like as if it's made of rubber. It's not necessary for being healthy, or that's not the most important thing of in good health. The second thing was, which you talked about, to what extent this can contribute to spiritual evolution, the physical part. Yes, I mean, if you go to the classics of Hatha Yoga, they don't talk only about the practices. In fact, the classic like Hatha Yoga Pradipika has mentioned very few physical practices. So they deal more with the spiritual aspects of yoga than with the physical. It's only later that as a distortion, the spiritual aspect came to be neglected, and there were many innovations made so far as the physical practices are concerned, and they came to occupy center stage. So that was a later development. Now, how does these physical practices help? One is through the attitude with which we do them. If we do them with the attitude that I'm doing these practices because they'll make my body more healthy, and if my body becomes more healthy, then it will become a better instrument for implementing the divine will. If one does it with that type of an attitude, yes, they will contribute. Another important thing which Sri Aurobindo has mentioned in this context is that just as mental immobility is important for improving the function of the mind, that's what meditation is about. We may call it mental immobility, which actually is a very carefully chosen word because it is not a blank mind. Sometimes we feel that if the mind is blank and we are not thinking of anything, then we are meditating. But it's more of mental immobility, which means you can't be easily disturbed. So just as mental immobility is important, physical immobility also contributes to it. That's equally, and the two go together. So if one is able to achieve that physical immobility, which in turn will supplement and will get supplemented by mental immobility, then it helps in preparing the background, which will make it easier to go towards further spiritual evolution. Does that answer to some extent what you wanted to know?
There's a question in the same lines. Is Hatha Yoga a basic requirement in integral yoga?
Well, let me put it this way. Integral yoga is not a technique intensive yoga, which means that there's no emphasis on the techniques. But at the same time, while no technique is specifically prescribed, no technique is specifically proscribed either. So no technique is absolutely necessary, and at the same time, no technique is prohibited. Which means that the person can practice the techniques with the full understanding that yes, improving the bodily instrument is important, because that forms the adhar, that forms the base. That is the base on which, for which it's necessary to be able to, for even the mind to be able to function. Even the function of the mind has a physical counterpart in the brain. So without the brain, even the way the mind functions will not be able to function. So the body is important. We have to care for the body. We don't have to neglect the body. That is a part of integral yoga. But then suppose a person is paralyzed. This person can't do any practices. This person does not get disqualified for that reason from the practice of integral yoga. So that is what we have to understand. So no technique is absolutely necessary. And at the same time, techniques are not prohibited. With the right motive, right purpose, and with keeping the sense of proportion in mind, if we practice the techniques, certainly the Hatha Yogic techniques, they'll improve the function of the body, which is desirable for any type of life, whether a yogic life or not so yogic life. For either of them, having a healthy body is useful. It's an instrument for both, any type of life.
Sir, this is Sonika again. Just wanted to thank you for answering my question. I was unable to unmute myself. I muted myself while you were talking. So yeah, thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
There's another question. What is mindfulness? How is it different to meditation or pranayama?
Broadly speaking, meditative techniques are of two types. One are the concentration type, the other are the mindfulness type. So this is one of the broad categories. Mindfulness forms a part of one of the two broad categories of meditation. Instead of explaining too much about what the mindfulness technique is about, what I can say is that mindfulness does not mean a full mind, a cluttered mind. What mindfulness means is being mindful of what the mind is full of. Here, mindful of means careful, being careful about what the mind is full of. So mindfulness is essentially about being mindful of what the mind is full of, being careful about what. Now, what should the mind be full of? Thoughts which are worth retaining. So Mother has given a beautiful scheme in her commentaries on the Dhammapada about this. She says that we start with just being a witness, just observing whatever is going on in the mind. So first we observe. Then what we do is we start classifying. We start classifying the thoughts into those which are worth retaining and those which are not. And if you do that anytime, you'll find that in fact, much of our thinking is totally unnecessary, if not undesirable, which means most of the thoughts are in fact not necessary, even if they may not be undesirable. So we can get rid of most of them. So you're classifying them into necessary and unnecessary, desirable and undesirable. So you're classifying. And then the third stage is filtering those thoughts. Retain only those which are necessary and worth retaining. You'll be left with very few thoughts. So now your mind is in a mindful state because it's full only of what is worth retaining and what is necessary. So that is a state of mindfulness. There's a fourth stage after that, which the Mother has mentioned, and that is mastery. So that you'll get only those thoughts which are worth retaining and necessary. The other thoughts will not occur in your mind. So that is mastery. Now the gap between the third and the fourth itself can be a very long gap. Okay, that is mindfulness.
Yes. The next question we have is, can you elaborate more how in our daily life we identify the invisible yoga aspects?
How we identify
The invisible aspect in our daily life.
Yes. Since it is invisible, only the person who is practicing it knows it. Others may realize to some extent, now this person appears happier, appears more cheerful, smiles a lot more, does better work now, the quality of the work, his work has improved. The other persons may notice some of these things, but what is really going on in your mind, the motive behind these external changes is something which others will not know. And that is why it is invisible. But as I said, I mean, essentially, I mean, it boils down to three main aspects of life, which fills up our life: the work that we do, the attitude with which we do it, not what we do, but the motivation behind it, the attitude with which we do it, that is what is important. And the choices that we make in the course of our work or otherwise, the level at which we make those choices, and the way we respond to the ups and downs of life.
I think what the question also means is, for my own self, if I'm on the path, how do I identify the own invisible aspects in my own path, that this is the sense which I need to follow. So the invisible call or the invisible sense which I need to follow, or I want to have that guidance, how do I identify in my own life? So that may be the first step, and then it might reflect in the outside world. So how do in my own being I identify the invisible? That can be an extension of this question.
Sure. I think that's a valuable sort of clarification as well as elaboration of the question. The way I sort of decide what invisible work my life should involve, I think involves basically those one of the important pillars of sadhana, that is aspiration, which means I should sincerely want to be on that path, to go beyond where I'm already there. So once that aspiration is there, the path will start becoming clearer. And then will come in the next thing, and that is rejection, which means that whatever seems to be an obstacle to moving in that direction will start getting rejected from life. And not only it will get rejected, start getting replaced by its opposites, because leaving a vacuum is more difficult. Filling it with the opposites is easier. And that is what makes it worthwhile also. So for example, greed will get replaced by contentment, or anger will get replaced by forgiveness. So all the negativities will start getting replaced or displaced to some extent by their opposites. And then the person knows that something is going on within. And often the person also wants to know whether I'm only feeling something is happening, or am I really making any progress? Firstly, this question should not bother us too much. That's what the mother has said. Don't worry about the progress. She'll take care of it. You do your bit. That, of course, is the ideal. But then being human, we sometimes do have this curiosity. Am I really progressing? Is it really helping me? Then I think one should not measure it in terms of small units of every day or every week. A person who has been on the path for a few years, he just has to sit and reflect back and see that here was a situation to which I responded like this today. How would I have done it 10 years ago? Would it have been different? Here was a situation in which 10 years ago I could have got angry. Today I didn't. So really something has happened. I have changed. So these are the type of things that will often not tell a person that, yes, I'm changing. And there has been some inner change, which is now getting reflected in my outer life.
There's another question. Can all physical ailments be traced to some disorder in the mind as their ultimate source?
Actually, broadly speaking, this is true, because more and more we are learning about the mind-body relationship. We find there's hardly any condition in which there is no contribution made by psychological factors. But fortunately, it's a two-way street. While I'm in mental stress or various types of conflicts in the mind can lead to physical disorders. If the mind is at peace, not only we get more healthy, many of the diseases that developed because of these underlying psychological problems or underlying psychological distress can also start getting reversed. So it's a two-way street. So psychological factors can also hasten recovery from disease.
Do we have more questions? Would anybody like to ask any question?
if there are no more questions, oh, there is some question.
No, I was just like to take this opportunity and ask maybe one last
Oh, sure,
question.
sure.
You were talking about how yoga is that path and the process towards self-perfection.
Hmm.
So how does one understand or expand their understanding of the experience or the idea of self? And the more we expand the idea of self, the more we walk on the path. So what can be the process of understanding that what all is self is not just the parts, a very small part I identify with, but myself is much larger than what I experience. So how can one realize that?
And that's a very good question, and basically a question of what we identify ourselves with, whether we identify ourselves totally with the body and the mind, or remain at least curious and open to the idea that there may be more to us than just the body and the mind. In fact, most of us do have at least some sort of a dim awareness that there is something more than the body and the mind. So that acceptance and acknowledgement of this idea that I'm not just the body and the mind is the first step. And then, if we remain open to this idea and more alert, more vigilant, then we would find that more and more evidence that yes, we are more than the body and the mind. Because suppose we get an intuition and then we mistrust it. But then later on, we find that actually it was knowledge which was coming from some higher source, not from the ordinary mind. And it turned out to be true. Now, or say you think of something which I think most of us have experienced. You want to talk to somebody and the meeting has not been planned, but then you just go out of the house and the first person you meet is that person whom you wanted to meet. Now, how did that coincidence happen? Was it just a coincidence, or was it synchronicity, which was organized at a level higher than our normal understanding? Now, these are all things, which make us feel more and more that the body and the mind is not all that we are. And then we also find that gradually that it is not just addition to our knowledge. It's not something which is simply intellectual entertainment, which we are getting from this type of an understanding, but it can contribute in a meaningful way to make our life more meaningful, to make our life happier and healthier. While I mean, these are being happy and healthy are not the goals of life, but then these are things we want. And in the initial stages, it's not a sin to get motivated, to get further into the path and start trusting that part of the being, which is not very obvious, but actually happens to be behind and beyond what is visible to us.
Thank you. There are a few questions on meditation. Would you like to take it now or in the meditation technique session?
Well, we have a session on meditation, but there are some quick ones. We can take them still.
Yeah, so there are two I'll go together. Is meditation concentration or letting go of thoughts? And how does one know that I'm meditating and not just daydreaming? These are the two questions.
Let's take the second one first, whether I'm meditating or daydreaming. There can be easily distinguished because daydreaming is still a surface activity of the mind. It may be in the world of fantasy, but all the same, it's still a surface activity of the mind. Whereas meditation is about quieting the normal surface activity of the mind, reducing the congestion, reducing sort of its engagement with things which are leading nowhere. So that is what meditation is about. And what was the first question?
Is meditation concentration or letting go of thoughts?
Yes, as I said, I mean, there are broadly speaking these two types, concentration and mindfulness. The two can also be mixed. It's not that there is a watertight compartment, one cannot go with the other. When we talk about the technique of meditation, we'll see, in fact, Patanjali's scheme. We have two aspects, dharana and dhyana. Dharana is concentration, dhyana is mindfulness. So the two can also be mixed.
One last question in the chat box and then one person. how do you expose children to yoga?
Yes, I'll take it in two aspects. One is the physical aspects of yoga, and the other is the broader aspects of yoga. Both can be done. But physical aspects, if the child finds that the parents are doing it, that probably will be the best introduction. And this can begin when the child is, if not newborn, at least a few months old. The child can be in the crib, and the child in the crib is not always crying. Near the child's crib, which will make you feel better and the child also feel better, just unroll your mat and start doing these practices early in the morning. The child picks up without being told anything that this is as normal a part of everyday life as eating or sleeping or and so on. So the child takes it as a part of ordinary life. So that's how the child gets clued in. And once the child is 2 or 3 years old, you'll find that the child will start copying you and may not do it methodically. Don't insist on that. Let the child do it his or her way. Sometimes the child will be doing better than you, because some of these poses come very instinctively to them. And even if they do it in a way that appears to you risky, nothing happens to them because their body is so flexible and so immune to all types of accidents like falling and excessive bending, that nothing will happen to the child. So that is the first, the physical part. And if I may share, I mean, I've seen it personally happen to my grandchildren. Okay. And I do it, their parents also do it. And nobody had to tell them that this is a part of life. Now, the other is the other aspect, the invisible part. The invisible part is essentially about being truthful, sincere, grateful, some of these qualities. That's also part of yoga. Now, these things, again, can be brought out to children through stories. Stories which do not sermonize, but carry that message, and the child just internalizes it. That is where it should be left. That old-fashioned way of telling a story with a moral and then finishing. Children, what did you learn from this story? That is gone. That is obsolete. Doesn't work. What is important is just tell the story and leave the child to internalize the message. At the most, what you can do is to reinforce it. You can raise a few questions which prompt the child to reflect. And when the child goes through that reflection, sometimes what you wanted to tell the child as the moral of the story comes out while the child is speaking out, verbalizing that reflection. Okay, so that is the way to go about it.
Yes, this one. Yes, Jogiji, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Sure. So Shri Aurobindo Ashram in Delhi is doing a lot of work for underprivileged communities. For example, giving vocational training to thousands of children last many years and many more things. I'm curious to know the relationship between yoga and working for underprivileged communities. So if you can throw some light, that will help me to understand.
Yes. Firstly, I mean, yoga is something to be practiced, and it's an expression of love of the people around us. So trying to give what we have to those who need it is what creates that complementary situation that completes our practice of yoga or becomes an essential part of our yoga. So while we are doing this for these young people from underprivileged families, giving them a head start by giving them circumstances in which they can grow, we are practicing our yoga, we are practicing our sadhana, because we are expressing our love to those around us by giving what we have, what they need. So we are fulfilling that purpose. But having said that, to look upon it as something that we are doing to help them would be not the best way to look at it, because we are helping ourselves more than we are helping anybody else, because we are growing spiritually through what we are doing. What seems to be helping them is actually not so much of a help that we are giving them, they are helping us. They are helping us by providing us an opportunity to practice our yoga. That would be a better way of looking at it. Why I'm emphasizing that is because it's a common misunderstanding in that we are helping these people, so we are doing a good deed. We are actually doing it for ourselves, practicing our yoga, growing spiritually through it. Why it's important to consider it? Because of two reasons. One is that if we look upon it as helping them, then we have a tendency to evaluate the results very objectively. That's a very common modern trend, that we must evaluate and quantify how much change are we able to bring about. And when we do that, the results are generally disappointing because the objective criteria don't come up to our expectations. The important thing is not those objective criteria. The important thing is that at least to some people, it has made some difference. And more than that, it has helped us grow spiritually. It has been our own sadhana. So to acknowledge that there is a certain degree of self-interest, if not selfishness, hidden even in these spiritual practices is something which honesty requires that we admit that. The second important thing is that if all this type of social work, as it is called, could solve the problems of the world, they should have been solved long ago. Because so many social workers, reformers, revolutionaries have come and gone, and yet the problems of human existence continue to be as they have been for thousands of years. Which means that we are not really able to eliminate these problems. We may be able to make a little difference to the lives of a small number of people, but the problems don't disappear. One set of problems goes, another set of problems appears. So the problems of human existence have not really been solved by this type of activities. What is it that will solve them? A basic change in human nature, which is a simple way of saying the same thing, a rise in the average level of human consciousness. And that is what Sri Aurobindo's and the Mother's mission is about.
Thank you.
That will be all for all the questions today. Tomorrow we have a first practical session. We will, after the session, sharing the recording of the class as well. So all of you will be interested in practicing it during that time. Please bring your mats and we have the practical session. Today we end the session with a collective bhajan. So I would encourage you to sing along and create that space for your own self and in the collective as well. So I'll just share the screen with the bhajan.
प्रभु जी दया करो मन में आन बसो 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 तुम बिना लागे सुना तुम बिना लागे सुना खाली घट में प्रेम भरो खाली घट में प्रेम भरो प्रभु जी दया करो मन में आन बसो प्रभु जी दया करो मन में आन बसो तंत्र मंत्र पूजा नहीं जानू तंत्र मंत्र पूजा नहीं जानू ही मानूं, मैं तो केवल तुमको ही मानूं, मैं तो केवल तुमको ही मानूं, मैं तो केवल तुमको ही मानूं। सारे जग में ढूंढा तुमको, सारे जग में ढूंढा तुमको, अब तो आकर बाह धरो, अब तो आकर बाह धरो। हे प्रभु जी, प्रभु जी, हे प्रभु जी, प्रभु जी, प्रभु जी, दया करो मन में आन बसो, प्रभु जी दया करो मन में आन बसो, प्रभु जी दया करो मन में आन बसो। तुम बिना लागे सुना, खाली घट में प्रेम भरो, तुम बिना लागे सुना, खाली घट में प्रेम भरो, प्रभु जी दया करो मन में आन बसो, प्रभु जी दया करो मन में आन बसो, प्रभु जी, प्रभु जी, प्रभु जी। प्रभु जी दया करो मन में आन बसो, प्रभु जी दया करो मन में आन बसो, प्रभु जी दया करो मन में आन बसो।
Thank you, everyone. We meet tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.